Hi there, I thought I'd do a short video reflection for today, which is the first Sunday of Advent. And the Bible readings that I'm going to be reflecting on today are from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 33, verse 14 to 16. 1 Thessalonians, chapter 3, verse 9 to 13. And Luke's Gospel, chapter 21, verse 25 to 36. So feel free to stop and have a look at those and then restart the video. So here we are on the first Sunday of Advent, the season approaching Christmas. But why are we hearing all these apocalyptic things in the readings in the lead up to Christmas? Isn't Christmas supposed to be about the baby Jesus and stars and angels and farm animals and things? We do have signs in the stars in the gospel reading, but it seems a bit more ominous. It's also talking about distress among the nations. It sounds a little bit like our world at the moment. Advent is a time of expectation and anticipation, but in the readings it seems like instead of anticipating the arrival of baby Jesus, we're waiting for the return of Christ. I don't know how you feel about this idea of the return of Christ, but while I was talking with a few people about this idea during the week, I had a few different responses. A lot of people I heard from weren't too keen on the idea of the return of Christ, and I heard three reasons for that. The first reason is that this idea has been associated with judgment, and often Christians have said that when Jesus returns, he'll judge humanity. And conveniently, Christians have often said that those who are outside the Christian faith will be judged harshly and punished, while we Christians will be spared for anything bad that we've done. Some Christians have said that only those who follow Christ in the right way will be spared, and that Christians from other traditions are also going to be punished harshly. Christians have often said that the returned Christ is going to send people to suffer in hell for eternity. That doesn't seem just. The second reason that I heard people saying that they don't like the idea of the return of Christ is that it's been almost 2,000 years and Jesus has not returned. In the gospel reading, we hear Jesus specifically saying that he would return within the lifetimes of the people he was speaking to. He says, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place." In the ancient church, people did believe that Jesus was going to return very soon, within their lifetimes. But it's now been almost 2,000 years and Jesus hasn't returned. So we shouldn't really be expecting it now, should we? Not when Luke's gospel is saying that he would return during that generation. The third reason that I heard people saying that they didn't like the idea of the return of Christ is that it's given rise to the idea that we shouldn't care for the earth and that we shouldn't worry about those who suffer. The reasoning has gone that the return to Christ will destroy the earth and either create a new earth or whisk us away to heaven. And so we don't need to care for the earth. And with regards to suffering could be justified if those who endured it could be offered an afterlife in heaven to make up for it. The promise of an afterlife in heaven meant that the difficulties of people living on the earth could be overlooked. However, in Paul's letter to the church in Thessaloniki, the apostle says to Christians of that city that he's praying that they would have an increase in love for each other and for all people, not just people in the church. If we love each other and love the people around us, we can't allow suffering to continue, and we have to try and help each other. We have to try and help our neighbours in their suffering. And we know that the early church had a tradition that said that when you helped someone who was in need, if you helped somebody who was suffering, you were actually helping Christ. In Matthew's gospel, it says that when we feed the hungry, we feed Christ. When we give water to the thirsty, we give water to Christ. When we welcome the stranger, we're welcoming Christ. And when we clothe the naked, we're clothing Christ. That's from Matthew chapter 25. And in Luke's gospel, we hear a story of some of Christ's followers meeting a stranger on the road and eventually recognizing that that stranger is Christ. That's in Luke 24. This leads me to wonder about whether it's correct after all to say that the return of Christ hasn't happened. If we're attentive, we might find that Christ has been constantly returning to us in the form of those who are vulnerable and those who are suffering. This is why Advent is all about paying attention. We're called to look for the arrival of Christ among us. Christ may come to us as a child or as an adult. Christ may come to us as a man or a woman. Christ may come to us and refuse to fit any of the categories that we're used to. The way we treat vulnerable people is the way that we treat Christ. And we may feel nervous about the idea of judgment, but I do believe that people who mistreat our vulnerable neighbours should be held accountable. There's judgments that have to be made. I don't mean that anyone should be punished for an eternity of suffering. I don't mean that anybody should be punished with an eternity of suffering, but there should be consequences for mistreating the vulnerable, and forgiveness shouldn't mean we allow people to keep treating others badly. This kind of judgment should mean that we're challenged to side with those who are vulnerable, to adopt God's own bias. This judgment should lead us to call our neighbours and our leaders to side with the vulnerable of our community and of our world. If that's where we place ourselves, we don't need to be nervous about judgment. If that's where we place ourselves, we may see glimpses of the reign of Christ, places where life can flourish despite chaos and destruction and desolation that may be going on in the world. Places where new shoots of life are growing up out of the ashes. Let's take some time to reflect and consider what God's Spirit may be saying to us.